Ghana has been hailed as a shining example to all of Africa, a model of democracy, decent governance and responsible economic management in a continent struggling to fulfill its potential. But if Ghana looks like a success story to outsiders, how does it look to Ghanaians themselves? My guest today is the leader of the main opposition party and candidate for president, Nana Akufo-Addo. Can Ghana use its resource wealth and inward investment to benefit the many, not just the few? Nana Akufo-Addo, welcome to Hardtalk.
Thank you very much for having me.
This idea that Ghana is some sort of role model, a beacon for all of Africa, does it make you proud, or does it make you feel that in some ways we're misreading what's happening in Ghana?
Not so much that it makes us proud, but I think that what it does for us is to give us a certain sense of responsibility. After all, we were the first nation south of the Sahara to become independent. So the developments in Africa have a particular resonance for Ghanaians. We have set, and from the early days, and our first leader, Kwame Nkrumah, the whole Africa project was very much a Ghanaian project. So it's a sense of responsibility rather than pride. We are required to show ourselves as governing ourselves in an intelligent and a modern manner. I think that is what the whole democratic movement of our country is about.
Yeah, it just strikes me, it puts you as the leader of the opposition and candidate for president at the end of this year, puts you in a slightly awkward position. For example, when you have Barack Obama come to your country in 2009 and be extraordinarily friendly to President Mills, your rival, and suggest that in his view, you know, democracy, economic management in Ghana is going very well. It's not necessarily what you, as leader of the opposition, want to hear, is it?
No, I certainly want to hear that he's touting our democratic credentials, because I think that is important for the entire Ghanaian nation, not just for a particular party or the other, because it's important for us. It's been a major issue in our history since independence, whether or not we will get to the state of democratic governance. And that we have got to it is a matter which involves virtually all sections of the Ghanaian population. So as far as that is concerned, that's not a worry for me.
Well, let me stop you there for a moment, because it is interesting to me that you are so confident and sure of Ghana's democratic credentials, because you, after all, are the candidate who in 2008 was so infuriated by the outcome of the presidential election that you, for a while, didn't accept the Electoral Commission's verdict. You lost by, what, 23,000 or so votes.
No.
And you threatened to challenge it in the courts.
No. What happened was that by the time the final verdict came, and if you remember, the last election was in three parts. There was the first formal part, and then there was the second round, and within the second round there was a third election. It was when the whole process was over that the announcement was made. We didn't hesitate. I believe the Electoral Commission made his report his declaration in the morning. And within 2 or 3 hours of that, I had accepted it and congratulated President Mills. There was a period when we were thinking...
Yeah, I think it's fair to say you did question the Electoral Commission for some time.
There were moments when we felt that the process, the sufficient irregularities obtained to the process, that we should look at the possibility of going to court to challenge it. But in the end, our decision was that no, Ghanaian democracy and stability, unity of our nation, required that we should accept the results in good faith and work for another day. That's exactly what we did.
Indeed.
The very day that the announcement was made, within hours of the announcement, I'd gone on the radio and on Ghanaian television to congratulate Professor Mills on his victory, however narrow it was.
Sure, and here we are almost 4 years later, and as you say, fighting another day is soon going to be a reality for you. But how do you feel when MPs in your own party, I'm thinking of Ken Ayapong, when they say things like this, quote, any NDC, that is the ruling party, macho man who dares steal a ballot box in the next election will be crushed to death. Anyone who tries to rig the vote will be lynched.
There's a lot of very high level, high passionate political dialogue in Ghana, and I think that in many parts of the world, I mean, steamy language as the elections approach.
Well, yeah, excuse me if I may. I mean, when you talk to me about the way in which Ghana has established its democratic credentials, surely the point is to get rid of extraordinarily inflammatory language like that.
And that is what has been happening, progressive over time. Ghanaian democracy is a relatively new phenomenon. And it's difficult to look at the phenomenon in the same way as you would look at 400-500 years of English democracy. That's not our experience. We are getting there, and I think that systematically over time we have shown.
But why, if that's the case, why do you use as a mantra for your election campaign, which you've sort of already begun on the road in Ghana, why do you use this phrase, all die be die?
That one was a phrase that was responsible to particular events that have occurred. Since the Mills administration...
I mean, to be clear to people who don't necessarily understand the Ghanaian importance of that, you seem to be adopting a sort of very all-or-nothing approach.
Not at all.
Fatalistically suggesting to your supporters that
if I'd been adopting an all-or-nothing approach, my attitude towards the 2008 election and the way in which my party and I conducted ourselves would not have been the same. What we've been trying to imply is that the examples we've seen of how elections have been conducted under this administration leave quite a lot to be desired. We've had 3 or 2.5, as it were, by-elections. And all of them have been characterized by moments of violence, of great tension, and they've been victims of these violence. Up till today, the president of our country has never expressed any regret or remorse about these events. And it was necessary for us to alert the country to say that
you're using language which refers to all die be die, or indeed squashing or lynching opponents. It's hardly fostering a new, more tolerant...
Largely because it is important also to get across to the point that that is not the way to go in a country which is trying to build a democracy, to go down the road of violence, because inevitably violence begets violence. And that is the point that we're trying, that we do not want to go down that road. If there had been, in 2008, our attitude towards politics, we were the ruling party at the time, had been an all-or-nothing approach, it may be that the events that occurred after the election wouldn't have gone as smoothly as they did. To have invited an Obama to come to our country to praise all of us for the way we're developing. The language gets steamy, but I believe at the end of the day, when all of us sit down and reflect on what we need to do, we can make sure that the final result is a result that is in the interest of the peace and stability, to the progress of our people.
Let me look at it another way then. We go back to my opening question about Ghana's perceived success within Africa. And I think many people have picked up on that theme, not just Barack Obama. The figures are pretty good. I mean, growth rate's extraordinary. You had 13% last year, 9% I believe this year. You're predicted to be in the top 10 global nations for growth over the next decade. All fantastic stuff if you're Ghanaian. Why then did you say recently, what chance do we have as a nation when we churn out such appalling statistics? If Ghana were a company, you said, it would have been shut down.
We're talking about the statistics about our educational system, which is proving to be a serious crisis. The young men and women of our country who are going to school, by the time they enter secondary school, what we call the senior high school, already over 50% of them find themselves out on the streets without any serious educational background, without any serious skills, largely because of the failure of the system to accommodate and provide opportunity for all of them. That is a major issue for the future of our country. And despite these statistics, some of these statistics, I mean, on the surface of them may sound excellent, but really what are they? They're about the influence of oil on our national accounts for the first time.
So you're suggesting that this could be a classic African story of amazing resource potential being squandered by mismanagement?
The potential is there.
Well, in that case, then, would you plead guilty to be party to that mismanagement when you were a senior minister in the period from 2002?
I wouldn't plead guilty, largely because the period of our period in office saw a dramatic expansion of the Ghanaian economy. That is when these growth rates
saw a ballooning deficit. I mean, you squandered money in your government like nobody before. You left office with a deficit, a budget deficit of something like 13-14%.
No, those figures have been challenged.
Well, I just read the latest World Bank report, which looks back and
those figures have been challenged, and they are They're much
You
lower
might challenge them
figure.
because you don't like them, but nobody
Not
at the World
necessarily,
Bank seems
because
to challenge
yeah,
them.
the World Bank at the end of the day is not exactly the Bible. I mean, they also make mistakes.
No, it wouldn't make a claim to be the Bible.
Yeah,
My
but I'm
point,
saying
though,
that
is that
they
you
make
don't have to
mistakes.
just don't take my word on the deficit. Look at inflation. When you left office, it was in double digits. I believe it was close to 20%. At least this government's cut that. So when you talk about appalling statistics, a lot of them seem to be your responsibility.
When we got into office, it was over 40%. 6-7 years before, it was over 40%.
Yeah, but the current government's halved it again.
The current government has halved it again because it had the foundation on which we built. It was 42% when we came into office in the year 2001. Runaway inflation and depreciation currency, all of those substantial efforts had been made to correct those before we left. But that is not to say that the work was a finished product. It's a work in progress, and it continues to be a work in progress.
It seems to me that what's important about the last few years in Ghana is that the international community, thinking about World Bank, IMF, and indeed the Chinese government as well, they've all looked at what's happening in Accra and they've given it a stamp of approval by lending and investing in a massive way inside your country. Seems to me, whatever you say about the current Mills administration, the international view is that his economic management is worth investing in.
We have oil. We've never had oil before. We now have oil in commercial quantities and being developed by companies that know what they're doing. And the first oil is really the biggest responsibility for this dramatic expansion of our national accounts and receipts.
Well, are you sure? Because look at the reality. I mean, it's going to be huge because you've got up to 700 million barrels worth in the sea just off your shores.
But that's exactly what it is.
No, but hang on a minute. The reality is, if we're talking about deficits, we're talking about economic management. Right now, you're only pumping about 70,000 barrels a day. So you can't say that everything that's been achieved in the last 4 years is all about oil revenue.
The figures that the President himself gave in the State of Nation of Rates was that all revenues last year were over $400 million. There's a huge...
But there's gold, there's cocoa, there's a whole heap of other things. All I'm saying to you is, if you look at China, for example, $3 billion in grants and credit lines, plus another $13 billion worth of infrastructure investment.
All those are very, very welcome.
So you have no problem with that?
I don't have any problem with it. I think the Chinese interest in our country is a very healthy one. It's one that all of us are very comfortable with in Ghana. What we have to be satisfied is that we get value for money in terms of these investments. That is what the debate has been. There are serious questions about it, the way that the loans were structured. In Parliament, we spoke about it in very clear terms. We have continued to insist that much better negotiations could have taken place over the money and how it was to be spent.
And what about the quality of the infrastructure work the Chinese offer? In Angola, there are many people who are now talking about roads being washed away, hospitals subsiding because they were poorly built.
And these are all part of the argument as to making sure that we get true value for money. And that is why there's been a hesitation on our part in endorsing this opening. What it is, and I think that is something that we should make very clear, is that we welcome the interests of everybody in the development of the Ghanaian economy. How we handle that interest and how it plays in favor of the majority of our people, the masses of our people, that's our concern.
And to be clear about it, and I am interested in the way you've hedged some of your approval for what the Chinese are doing in your country. To be clear about it, if you are Ghana's next president, will you, for example, allow them to build up a significant stake in your oil industry and in your extractive mineral industries?
If they're going to do so in terms that appear to us normal and mutually beneficial, why not?
So that's a yes?
Yes, absolutely.
And what sort of percentage stake could you imagine the Chinese ultimately?
We'll see. We'll see. We'll see how the history will play itself out. Because
the Ghanaian people have to vote for you. They want to know what your vision is of the degree to which you'll let China buy into your economy.
What it is that we will look on a case-by-case basis at everybody who's interested in coming into.
Could they have a controlling stake in
I don't think we want anybody to have a controlling stake in our masses. We don't want to be the pawn of any power, whether it's left, right, Chinese, American, or anybody else. We want the controlling stake in the Ghanaian economy to be in the hands of Ghanaians.
Do you think, let me ask you this final point on China. Do you look across your own continent and feel that some countries are in danger of allowing China too much power and too much control in their economy?
I think that what it is that we should be all very clear about is that so long as we continue to be raw material producing countries, changing the destination of the export of those raw materials doesn't necessarily change the basic facts of life of our economies. And it is the changing of those basic facts that is the critical challenge for us. So seeing China becoming now the destination of preference for the export of African raw materials, as far as some of us are concerned, doesn't change the facts about the African economy. It is the fundamental nature of the African economy that we require to change if indeed we're going to bring prosperity to the mass of our people. And that is to move away from raw material producing economies to industrializing value-added economies. That's the challenge for us. And to the extent the Chinese investment, American investment, French investment, Japanese investment, Commonwealth, British investment plays into that fundamental objective, I welcome it. To the extent that it attempts to dilute or divorce itself or veer away from that, I would be critical of it. Because our fundamental objective is what we need to see established in our relations with whoever.
Yeah, all right, well, I've got that point, but I've been reading some of your campaign speeches over the last few weeks and months. You consistently accuse the Mills administration of overseeing rampant corruption. I think it's fair to say, looking back through Transparency International reports and many others, that corruption's been a problem in your country for a long time. It certainly goes back beyond the Mills administration into your administration and beyond that too. But I just look at what the current government has done, for example, signing up to the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, which the Angolans, for example, refused to do, introducing proposals for transparency in the auditing of contracts and other things in the oil business. Seems to me they're making a real effort to do things differently in Africa.
But at the end of the day, what are we left with? For instance, in the management of our petroleum revenues, our original position was that we should create a special petroleum account outside the consolidated fund so that we could look and track these revenues in an open and transparent manner. Because if you put the monies directly into the budget, the difficulty exists of finding out exactly how they play out. That, for instance, was a position that the government did not subscribe to. That we should create a special account which would enable the tracking to take place.
Do you believe that, as is perhaps the case in Nigeria and Angola and Equatorial Guinea, there is a real danger that this discovery of major oil off the coast of your country could become a curse rather than a blessing?
That has to be a concern for all of us Ghanaians. And the only way we can address it is the institutional arrangements that we make in the management of this new resource. It has to be. It has to be a constant source of anxiety and worry for each one of us, that if we don't put in the proper mechanisms, the proper institutional arrangements, it shouldn't be. It should be a source for us of additional resources that would enable us to focus on the transformation of our economy.
I just wonder why the Ghanaian people should believe that you are any more committed to a transparent oil industry, and not just the oil industry, but the transparency generally in the relationship between politics and business than the current administration. Because frankly, your record as a justice minister and senior minister in the previous administration doesn't suggest that your values were any different from theirs.
The values are very different. First of all, we're talking about people, I'm talking about us, who were at the very forefront of the struggle for democracy in Ghana. And what did that mean? That meant that we want an open system of government, accountable government. And that has been the very strongest driving force behind the political careers of many of us who are now today in the opposition. Making sure that our country didn't become like, so it had become in Africa, one-party government, authoritarian government, that would be open democratic government. So that's the first. The second is the record in government. And many of the measures that were put in place to ensure transparency, the Whistleblowers Act, the procurement law, all of these were legislation that were began by me when I was Attorney General in order to create the framework that would enable people to go out. For instance, the Whistleblowers Act, what we're saying, the first time it was tested in Ghana, the whistleblowers under the president.
No, sure, I understand what you're saying, but
ended up in jail. They didn't.
But the greatest indictment, frankly, of your government is the way in which you squandered money and left this huge hole in the budget deficit. I think you would now acknowledge that that was a profound problem.
No,
the last time your party was in power.
I don't accept that. I don't accept that proposition at all.
Well, I'll tell you what the Ghanaian people, it seems to me from reading a lot of stuff in the Ghanaian press, want to know is where exactly is the money going to come from next time around if you're in power for some of the very extravagant promises you've made. You, for example, have offered free secondary schooling for all Ghanaians, a promise you say you absolutely will deliver in 4 years in power. So have you costed it? How much will it cost?
The costing is being done. I mean, very soon we'll be in a position.
You can't make a promise like that.
No. Very soon we're going to be putting it out.
You don't know how much.
I do know exactly, but I prefer to tell the Ghanaian people directly before I tell you.
Many of them want Hardtalk. You can tell me.
It doesn't matter. I prefer to make that statement to the people of Ghana directly first, as to the cost. And
so you do know the cost?
Oh, we do, and we have a very good idea how also we're going to finance it.
Well, you're obviously not going to give me the figures, but just tell me how you're going to pay for it. It's clearly going to be a very great cost. You've got to train the teachers, you've got to build new schools.
All of that has been adequately costed, and we believe that first of all, the new revenues will help, more efficient management of what we have now, growth in the Ghanaian economy. These are the three sources which are going to enable us to fulfill that promise. And it's a promise that has been solemnly made to the Ghanaian people and is going to be solemnly kept. Not because it's a campaign promise, but because it is a necessity for the future of our country to educate all our young people and not to acquiesce in a situation whereby only segments of the community that have some money are able to educate their children.
It's an interesting
It's a major issue of human capital development.
Indeed.
And if we do not make the effort to achieve that, the development paradigm that we want to achieve is going to be very difficult for us to do.
Let me quote to you the words of Patrick Kawua, a Ghanaian who used to work for Microsoft in the US. He came home, he set up a private university just outside Accra. I believe it's very successful. He says Africa's reached an inflection point. The march to democracy across the continent is unstoppable, but he says we can bring change in one generation. The key is how we train a new generation of leaders. That, he says, will make all the difference. Sounds like you agree with that.
I do.
Well, in that case, here's my last thought to you. You, I'll be polite about it, but you're a veteran politician in Ghana.
Absolutely.
Your father was president. You've served in two administrations from 2000 to 08. You have an elite background. You were educated in the UK. You've been around a long time. Doesn't Ghana need a new generation of leaders to fulfill this promise?
The Ghanaian people will make that decision. I mean, that's all I can say. The Ghanaian people will make that decision, whether or not a new generation. I think that at all times what you're looking for is whether people resonate, whether people are articulating the views and aspirations of ordinary people.
Do you think you can connect with ordinary Ghanaians, given everything I just said about your background?
Absolutely. I think that the evidence is out there. The evidence is quite clear out there. If one
well, it isn't clear, because you lost the last election.
By a hair's breadth. By a hair's breadth. If one was so out of touch with the realities of the lives of ordinary Ghanaians, perhaps the margin would have been even stronger. I think that you can look at those statistics either way. But I have no difficulty in asserting that indeed one connects and will continue to connect, because you're talking about the matters of concern to ordinary people, their access to education, their access to jobs, how the economy is impacting on their lives, whether or not it is going to be possible for us to continue to operate the kind of economy that we've been operating so far. These are the critical questions.
They're the questions, and you will have to answer them in the election campaign. I hope to have you back when you are president, or indeed if you fail to be president. But thanks for being on Hardtalk.
Thank you indeed for having me.
It's been a while since we've had such a